All right, today, guys, we're going to be going over if I pull a PCM, a Powertrain Control Module, out of a 94 or a 95 vehicle with a 6.5 liter diesel engine, how do I go about checking it out and checking out the programming that's built into it? So the first thing I do when I get one of these is I check these connectors. And what you're looking for is whether or not there's any corrosion here. If there's any corrosion on here, then I would say you discard the unit. This is nice and shiny, it's good and clean, so I know we're in good shape there. The other thing I'm trying to look at is to get an idea for the damage of the casing. It's typical to have some light corrosion, but there shouldn't be a lot. And this looks in pretty good shape. So this is one that I obtained from the salvage yard, and I'm going to go check out further to see if it works. Now, I didn't film removing it because, frankly, the vehicle I took this from was, in an accident and was quite destroyed. So it wouldn't have been much to show you. But I wanted to give you some idea on how you would, where you would locate this and how you'd remove it. So I put some pictures together from the service manual. If you're getting it out of a CK truck, so pickup trucks, Suburban, Blazer, something like that, you're going to find it behind the glove box, right above the blower motor. So to get at this guy, all you got to do is there's a little clip with a strap on the left-hand side, the driver's side of the glove box that you have to unhook and get a pair of pliers, and you can pull that and it just slides out, and then you can drop the glove box down, and you'll find this guy sitting on a tray up there. And the way he's oriented is the plugs are going to be coming in just like this. The plug is going to be coming in on this side on a diesel. If you were doing a 95 gas engine, it would be like this with the plugs. But on the diesel, it's like this. And then you've got these clips, these two in the front here that grab the tray it sits in, and then these two alignment pins on the back. That's how you'll find this sitting in a CK truck. This same control module that I'm showing here today is also used on a G-Van. And in a G-Van, it's going to be one of two places. It's either going to be sitting on a mount right under the driver's seat, or some models, it's going to be right behind the driver's seat, mounted to this pillar that's along the sidewall. So you think about the seat being here, and you kind of reach behind here, and you see this pillar up behind the door, and you could find it sitting in here. And these are these alignment pins that you see here are shown in the picture. So this guy's kind of sitting like that. And then the last version I'll show you is a P-van, like a step van, a chassis, the kind of chassis that you see like on an old motorhome or something like that. And this assembly is under the dash area. So on the driver's side is typically where you'd see this guy situated. So same powertrain control module on both C, K, G, and P model trucks and vans. So a lot of applicability, although not the only PCM used that year by far, right? There's still plenty of others. So this is the actual 95 one that I'm going over, 162.124.88. This has a number that it was superseded to that I'll roll at the bottom, and it's really nothing more than this rebuilt when they quit manufacturing these. But later in the video, I'm also going to talk about, I don't have one to show, but they, cosmetically identical. I'm going to talk about the 94 one as well. So let's take a look at the next step. So it looks in good condition. Electrical connection wise, it doesn't look too rusted out, doesn't look too banged up. What do we do next? Well, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to power it up. So I make a little harness using the connectors that this guy came with. Snap these back in like that. And by the way, pro tip, when you got this thing mounted in the truck and you're trying to get it out, these connectors have these little blue prongs that kind of latch on the bottom. This guy's sitting like this. You're just going to pinch that loose. You're going to take a flat end screwdriver, and you'll be able to pop them in here and work these connections out to get them loose. They're going to be really tight when they haven't moved for a long time. You'll be able to take the two pink ones off on the CK trucks, and then you'll be able to slide this guy out, twist him out, and then you'll be able to get the blue one out. All right, so what are we going to do to electrically check this guy out? So I've got this wiring harness set up, and I've also grabbed a first generation diagnostic connector, right? So this is obviously not an ODB2. This is the generation prior to that. And I'm going to show you how we wire that guy up. So I printed out some pictures from the 1995. The 94 is going to be the same service manual. And so what we've got here on the blue is all we really need is the 12-volt battery power. We're going to need to provide power to the PCM so we can power him up. So that's this orange wire that you see here. When we move over to this pink connector, right, all I'm going to grab here is this pink-black 12-volt ignition fused wire, and I'm going to put the two of these together. And this is going to be what I end up supplying voltage to power this guy up. I'm going to grab one more line from here, which is this white wire rather, with a black stripe. It's called diagnostic enable, and that's going to be part of what we need to run out to the diagnostic connector for the scan tool. That's all I need off of this smaller pink connector. And then the last one, the larger pink connector over here on the far right in the view we've got here. So we've got the blue one, the small pink connector, and now the large pink connector. We're going to take engine ground, which is a tan white connector, D1 cavity, and then I'm going to flip this over. So you got two rows, C and D. I'm going to flip this guy over. It's printed front and back. And then I'm also going to take in the C1 cavity, the black-white system ground. So I've got two grounds, and we see those guys right here, right? And then we run that ground over into the diagnostic connector, and then we have our diagnostic line running into that diagnostic connector. The last thing we need is this tan guy, and this guy is serial data. Now it says orange and black on here, and I don't know why. You know, as I went through this 95 service manual, some pages said orange and black, some said tan. This is just a typo, I think. I've never seen one that's orange and black on a 95 diesel, so they've always been tan. Haven't seen a 94, so maybe they were then, and this is a carryover, but just watch out. This is really supposed to be tan. So we see over here we've got a tan wire coming out there, and we connect it to the tan wire coming out of this diagnostic connector. So at that point, we've got the lines we need out of these connections, and then what I'm doing, another page here for how you would use the, how the wiring to the actual diagnostic link connector is. So we talked about that white-black diagnostic request line going to the B port, the system ground, the white-black there, coming over from the PCM going to the A port. And then finally the serial data, again, you know, it says orange-black, it should say tan, coming over and connecting to the M port. That's all you need for the scan tool to communicate with this guy. This diagnostic request line, you know, is typically what you would jumper over if you were trying to get the flash count of the trouble code on the instrument cluster, for example. So, but these three are what the scan tool would need to use. Now they talk about a Tech 1 in these old manuals, but this could be a Tech 1 or a Tech 2. I'm going to be using a Tech 2 because that's what I have, and it's a more up-to-date and modern tool. So let's go over to the Tech 2, and I'm going to leave that here. I'm going to go over the Tech 2 now. I'm going to do a couple of things here, right? So I've got these grounds and I've got these powers. I'm going to take a lab bench power supply. So I'm going to use to power up this PCM with 12 volts. So I'm going to be supplying 12 volts to him through this bench power supply. These connectors back in first generation, they didn't supply any power. So we're going to have to power the Tech 2 externally. So you can either, just like you had to do back in the dealership days, you can either power it through a AC adapter like I'm showing here, or there's an adapter that plugs in the cigarette lighter, or there's one that hooks up to the battery. And the other thing I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to take my OBD2 connector off of the Tech 2 and put my ODB1 connector on. And then I'm going to bring this guy over here and get him connected up. Since it's not mounted on the dash, just going to have to give him a push to get him to mount, to fit in there. Okay, and now we're set. So we got ground, we got power, and we got the Tech 2 powered. Get some of these cables out of the way for you guys. And then I'm going to turn this power supply on in just a moment. First, we'll get this guy going. So just like you would do with a newer vehicle, as soon as she comes up, we're going to go into diagnostics, and we're going to scroll down here because this PCM's out of a 1995. We're going to scroll down here to 1995. It's a light-duty truck because it came out of a Suburban K2500. We're going to go into Powertrain. We're going to select the L65 type of diesel because this was a VIN F coated engine that came out of, and it had a 4L80E automatic. And I'm going to be looking at field service. Now it's going to tell me that there's no power, which is normal because I haven't powered on the lab power supply yet. I'm going to fire that up. And now our PCM is online, and we're able to talk to it. Now this is all spurious data because we haven't hooked up any of the sensors. But there's two things we can do to check this out with a scan tool. We can come up here and take a look at what's called the calibration ID. The calibration ID is on the EPROM chip that's installed in here. We'll look at that in a minute. And it tells me what calibration or firmware version is running in there. Now, I'll tell you why that's important in a little bit. So that's one thing. So now I know we can talk through serial data and diagnostic enable lines, power and ground. We're talking to the PCM. We're getting this information. The next thing we can check is that it's reading the right voltage. And right here we're putting in 11.8 and we're reading 11.4. And if I just juice this up a little bit to an even 12 on the bench power supply, we get 11.7 coming out. So I'm satisfied that we're communicating with the PCM through the scan tool, and that's about all you can do on this generation of a PCM with the scan tool. I can't use SPS on it because this is back in the still in the PROM type era. So we now know it sort of kind of works. So let's go on to the next step. So I'm going to go ahead and power off our Tech 2, power off our bench power supply, disconnect our leads here, and disconnect our Tech 2 line. And then we're going to remove these cables that we used for this test. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to flip this guy on and take a look at the bottom. So you can see on a diesel PCM, there's just a single door and a single screw. If this would have been a gasoline one, you'd see 2 screws to access this type of door. But underneath here, in a gas PCM of this era, you'd have something called a MEMCAL. And when we open up this diesel one, this is a T15 bit, by the way, to remove this screw. We see this little blue carrier in here, and this is just an EPROM on this guy. And if we turn it around, we can see there's some codes on it. So BPAC, and then 4 digits, 1621, then another 4 digits, 6876. So I'm going to tell you what all that means. So here I've got you a copy of the last service bulletin on this topic for how to read PROMs and MEMCALs and their identification. I'm just going to go right to the pictures. So for 1995, what we see is exactly what we see over here. We're going to see a 4-letter code, which is called a broadcast code, and then we're going to see 2 rows of 4 digits each. And this is the actual part number of either the MEMCAL or the EPROM. That's how you'd see it, just like we see here on 95. The 94s, this was something that transitioned towards the end of 94. So the 94s, you might see a case of 94s looking like this, or maybe even some very early 95s, where it would be Delco, the broadcast code, and then a 4-digit number that was called a PROM ID. And what this 4-digit number typically is in practice is it's the last 4 digits of the part number incremented by 1. So you see in their example, they're showing 4624, and then they're showing over here 4625. They're trying to emphasize that format. And let me tell you, I'll show you in here later on, I've inventoried all of these EPROMs for you guys. This is not always the case. GM sometimes cheated on this. Sometimes this digit is 2 more than the part number. So it's at least 1 more, but it's sometimes 2 more. So the next thing we're going to do is take a look at this EPROM and pull him out and see what we can do to check him out. To extract this guy, you see there's 2 little clips here. You just pinch them in and lift up and wiggle him out. And on these diesel ones, you know, there's this kind of cute little blue brand alignment that fits it into this carrier. And then it's a 28-pin EPROM on here. We'll look at it in a minute. And then it just fits on these outer pins into these pins here. Make sure you keep note of the orientation. The labeling is going to be to the left when the screw hole is at the bottom here in this position we've got here, right? So when this guy's up like this, it goes back in that way. So to get a look at what's inside here, you can just kind of give a gentle squeeze on each end, right? And you can see there's like a clip of the blue holding the brown, and it'll come right out. And what we can see is inside here is this is just a fancy carrier that's holding a 28-pin old-style single EPROM, EPROM, for electrically programmable read-only memory. It's erased by shining ultraviolet light onto the actual memory die. So this is before the days of flash and before the days of EEPROMs. This is what you've got. This is technology from the 1980s that persisted into the 1990s. So we can still take a read of this guy with an EPROM programmer. For this type of PCM, this 162.12488 one that we talked about, it's a 27C512 type EPROM. This particular one is supplied by Fairchild Semiconductor, and I'll show you how you can tell that in a minute too. So let me get some of this stuff cleared out of the way, and I'm going to set up an EPROM programmer right here so we can read this chip, and I'll show you how to make a quick adapter for how you can do that. All right, guys, I'm going to be using my TL866 2 Plus. Nice, inexpensive kind of programmer. There's nothing special about reading this. And then what I'm going to do to get this fitting in here, because as you can see, this carrier is, it looks like it's the same width, but when you take a look underneath, it's actually a little bit too wide, so we're going to have to make an adapter for this. The chip itself, at least on the ones I've seen, is secured into this carrier. It's like a little spot. If you kind of zoom in here, you can see there's a little spot where they've soldered each of these pins to this carrier, so you can't remove it very easily. There's an adapter that a company makes that you can plug in on this side, and then you can kind of flip it over upside down and put it in the EPROM programmer, and you can use it. And I'll put a link to that in the description, and maybe if I can, I'll put something in the bottom here of the video for you on that. But I'm just going to take a couple of these, kind of 14-pin headers that you would use to mount on a PCB, and then I'm going to take the end that would go into a dip socket, and I've just taken kind of a pair of flat pliers that have no teeth on them that you use for this kind of stuff, and I've just given them a little bit of a bend inward, like you can see like that. And that's going to allow me to get this guy to fit in to the ZIF socket here. So you'll end up with something like this. It's a little bit inverted to make up for the fact that this guy is just a little bit too wide to fit into a standard EPROM programmer, right? And we fit him in like that. Push him down, lock him in. At that point, we're good to go. So I mentioned that this was a Fairchild FM27C512, and which you would see, pulling this out here. There's a pin out here for you guys for your reference. This is what you got here, right? So there's your UV window, and then there's the pin out for this 28-pin device. So I'll leave this down here on the bottom, and then I'm going to shift my attention over to the reader software for this programmer. So what you can do, I've got it set to an FM27C512, but you can come up here and you can tell it to just read the ID, and then over on this side here, if we read the ID, it'll spit that out, and we can see that this is an 8F85. So that tells us, the 8F tells us this is something made by Fairchild, and the 85 tells us it's a 27C512. So that when we're in need of going and picking the particular type of device, we know we can go to Fairchild. We know we can pick the FM27C512 in the DIP 28 style, and we got what we need here. So now if I come over here and I do a read of this guy, we won't have any trouble reading it. Now, if we do have trouble reading it, unless you've made a mistake with getting it mounted, then that tells you the EPROM's bad. It's normal to see all these zeros. It's just how GM did it. They didn't start writing this guy at the beginning. You have to kind of scroll down here, and at some point after the first few kilobytes, you'll start to see information written to the EPROM. And if you continue scrolling through this, you'll eventually come up to some of the tables, and you can start making out some text. And if you have a tuner software like Tuner Pro, figuring out what the value of these memory addresses are and things you can adjust is what those software packages do with something called an XDF file, which just maps these memory addresses to functionality that you'd see in the menu of something like Tuner Pro. But what I'm going to show you here is I'm just interested in solving a particular problem with this video, and so you try to see if you can keep things factory stock, and you're trying to see if stuff works rather. So I'm able to read it, so I know the EPROM's good. I'm going to go down to address 4000 for a moment, because I'm going to show you something down there. All right, here we go. 4000 coming up. All right, so there's 4000 right there. Here's 4000, and here's 4001. And we see the values in here are 1 alpha and Edward 5. Now, why is that important? What's the significance of that? Well, if I go over here, I've saved a little decimal to hexadecimal calculator. You can use anything you want. Let's take a look at what I'm trying to show you. Remember that ID that we read with the Tech 2, that 6885, that calibration ID? Well, if I convert that to hexadecimal, that's 1 alpha E5. So what you'll find out is this address 4000 and 4001 holds that calibration ID that is read out by the scan tool. Now, why is that important to know? Well, if I go back over here to the EPROM, if for some reason I don't have this label on this EPROM, or it's damaged and I can't make out the broadcast code or the part number, but I do have, and I don't have a scan tool, but I do have this EPROM device, I can read this and find out what the calibration ID is that way. So why is a calibration ID useful to know? Well, if I take a look now and I show you these tables I have that I use, I'm going to pull these up. These are spreadsheets that I've personally put together from a lot of different sources. I'm going to show you 95 first, then we'll look at 1994. So this is all of the EPROM chips that went into a 162.12.488 PCM. This is the GM part number. Here's the broadcast codes. This is the original EPROM number. And this is a touchscreen, so it jumped around when I touched it. This is the superseded, SSD is for superseded EPROM number. Then there's the PROM ID. Then there's the calibration ID. This is the body codes from the parts manual of all the different body codes that this particular one went to, as well as engine RPOs and transmission RPOs from the silver sticker on your glove box. And if it's applicable to picking the correct type of chip, the axle RPO. This is a lot more detailed than you'd see on one of these general broadcast code lookup tools out there, because most of them tailor mostly to gasoline, and none of them give you the work I've done myself just to kind of do all the part number traversing. So what does something like this mean? Well, if I take a look at the particular one that we've got, which was a broadcast code of BPAC, which is right here, I can see that that part number is 162.16876. It has a PROM ID of 6876, which, like I showed you on the service bulletin, matches the last 4 digits of the part number by 1995, and has a calibration ID of 6885. It fits a CK, which is either a two-wheel drive or four-wheel drive truck, 1.2, either a half-ton or a three-quarter-ton, 06. That's a utility body, so that would be like a Blazer or a Suburban. With the L65, which is the turbocharged VIN F code 6.5, and an MT1 RPO on the transmission, which would be a automatic transmission. GU6 is the rear axle ratio. I don't remember off the top of my head what a GU6 is, but that all this information helps you figure things out, right? So if you don't know the broadcast code, but you know the part number, you can find what you need. If you don't know the broadcast code or the part number, but you know the calibration ID, you can find what you need. If you don't have any of this, let's say the EPROM's completely missing from the PCM, then at least if you know the body type, the engine RPO from the glove box, the transmission RPO from the glove box, and in some cases it's useful to know the axle ratio RPO from the rear pumpkin on the end, then you can usually find which one you need. We can also traverse this, right? So we can see that 162.16.876 maps over and gets replaced by 162.447.88. And if I scroll down, I can see that 162.447.88 maps over to a broadcast code PXBY, which was discontinued. So this is the terminal end of this software series. So if I wanted to get the last fixes from GM or service bulletin corrections, I really want to find a BXPY EPROM and put that in here instead. Or at least find the image for one, and I can burn my own now with an EPROM programmer. So before I go into 94, let's just go back over here and look at this guy again. So a couple of things about this. If you were going to program it yourself and you don't want to make a thing like this, you can buy adapters. And again, I'll link some companies that do that. You're going to need to erase this ultraviolet window. This quartz window has to be exposed to about 30 to 40 minutes of ultraviolet light. And normally the kind of carriers that the chip fits into for that aren't going to fit with this holder. So you're going to have to, figure out how you're going to solve that problem. Whatever you do to solve that problem, just remember that ultraviolet light will cause permanent damage to your eyes. So make sure that you keep that in mind with whatever you're doing and opening covers and changing that. You don't have to do that though. What I would do in this situation, I would just discard this carrier and I would just make an adapter that fits right on here. What you can do is, you can just take like a header like this, a 14-pin header. And if we go back over to this guy, and if I can see okay, is I would put one of these headers in here, line it up correctly, one on both sides, make a little PC board that then has a dip socket, and then I would mount it that way. And you can find people that pre-make that for you. All right, so let me continue going back down. By the way, all of these terminal chips that are at the end of the line, these discontinued ones, I'll put a link in the description. They sometimes pop up on eBay. A few of them even are still past stock. I see on Rock Auto from time to time. And I'll just scroll through the rest of this so that between what I've shown on the screen here and what you might scroll back in the video, you can kind of follow this yourself just by watching the video and seeing what I've shown on the spreadsheet. So now let's take a look at 1994. Cosmetically, that 94 PCM looks just like this one from 95 that I showed. The one I'm going to be covering here is a part number 16183977 for 1994. It superseded and replaced an older number that I'll roll at the bottom, and then itself has been superseded by a rebuilt number that's currently available from AC Delco, and I'll roll that one at the bottom as well, and also put a link in the description if you're looking for one of these. Same kind of deal, except let's compare the two, right? If I go back to 1995, I can see I've got 47 rows in this spreadsheet, but the ones that say discontinued, I've just got like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I've got 14 down here, and I don't think there's any up here. There's a couple more here. 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. So out of 47 rows, because I'm not counting the first row because it's just headers, I've just got about 19 chips that cover all the vans. So you got G vans, you got P series, you got CK series, all the different vehicles with either an L65, an L49, or an L56 coded 6.5 liter diesel, all covered in just those 19 terminal numbers. When we look at 1994 and this 16183977 PCM, we can see we've actually got 139 of these. Now, the terminal ones are about the same. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. And I think there's a couple at the top here. 22, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 28, 29, 30, 31. So about 31. But there's a lot of churn in 94. Let's just take this first one, right? So this 806, this BJF was replaced by an 03 333. And if we scroll down to 03 333, that was a BKUZ. He was then eventually replaced again during 1994, 1620 7409. And if we go look for 1627, I lost my place, guys. Hold on. Hold on. I'm going to put a little marker here so I can see where I'm at. Okay. So I'm going to scroll down here and look for 07409. So here's 07409. And he was replaced, and he's BLSA, he was replaced by 10208. Now if we scroll down and look for 10208, I can see he was replaced, BMST was replaced by 15268. And then if I go down to 15268, I can finally see this was the terminal version, BNTN, on that particular series. So several EPROM revisions for various service campaigns or just fixing bugs in the firmware that represent the calibration, not all of which would affect your drivability, and some of them may have only been for specific situations. So GM didn't actually push these on everyone, but just goes to show you what a parts number nightmare it must have been back then. I'm going to go back to the top here so that those of you that are looking this and want to get a look at it on video can see. So right here's the first 25 entries of this spreadsheet, and then I'll scroll down and we'll look at the next 25 down to row 50 here, and then we'll take a look at the next. This way you guys are looking for a particular number, you can find it. And then what's going on here with these question mark ones is I found a few references to these BLY series broadcast codes as well as this BMAP one. Part numbers, PROM IDs, calibration IDs out there, but couldn't find any information on what they were superseded to or any information from GM that they ever got discontinued. So that's a point of research. If you have one of these, please give us a comment so we can kind of help fill in this table with these question marks here and complete this for 1994. Now continuing to scroll down from 75 down. If you're looking for one in here, 75 to 99. And then finally, the bottom section here, from 100 down. Actually, I'm going to have to go a little bit further. And then we get the last section here. And again, this is for 1994. Previously, I showed 1995. I'll scroll. I'll put links in the description to the terminal EPROMs that are in the discontinued point, so you can follow your super session to get to the most recent one if you're trying to do a repair or restoration for both 94 and 95. Also, the current remanufactured superstition numbers for both 94 and 95 PCMs. They're not interchangeable. 94 is this 16183977 number. 95 was the other number we saw here on the other sheet. Whoops. Must have minimized it before. 162124888. They will look the same. You do the same approaches and everything I covered in this video, but they have their own unique broadcast code EPROMs that plug in there, although they look the same. They're in that same little blue carrier, and they're the same 27C512 type of chip. I hope this helps you out in hunting down a salvage yard PCM and checking it out and seeing if it's working and it's good and fits what you're trying to do, that it's got the right EPROM chip in it. If it's missing the label, how you might go about figuring out what one is there. If you're missing it altogether, how you might go about figuring out which one you need and go track that down. If you've got some comments on some of these or you're using some of these numbers, feel free to leave a comment down with what your experience has been or places that you've been able to locate these. Please go ahead and take time to like this video if you find this kind of content useful, because that conveys to me whether you guys want to see this kind of content in the future. And please take time to subscribe. Thanks for watching.